Americas are just extraordinary. And murals and frescoes play such a huge part.
One of the things that's interesting is that growing up with my parents and stuff, the art, we were not exposed to art, but we were exposed to functionality. What we created was functional, but now it is kind of art. We were fortunate to, Lucienne and I were fortunate to go see the exhibit. It was incredible. The Dimitroffs, I remember when I was studying with them or living with them, they brought out a self-portrait fresco of Frida Kahlo that she had painted.
My goodness.
It sold, I think, for $25,000. They went up to Sotheby's at that time, and that was in '84. Probably now it'd be millions, or $1 million or something, really up there.
First painting, Latin American painting, that sold out of Sotheby's or Christie's, but the first one to sell for more than $1 million was a Frida Kahlo self-portrait. And it was sold by a woman who collected art in Des Moines, Iowa. And she sold it to endow the Women's Studies program at the University of Iowa.
It was done in fresco, so if that was the fresco panel, I got to see it. And
well, no, it was not the fresco, because I'd never known she'd done a fresco self-portrait.
It was a fresco self-portrait.
Wow.
So we were, while in there, I mean, to pick one painting, to see all those photographs, unbelievable. To see the self-portrait of Siqueiros, to see that Orozco was in there, and to see the beautiful beginnings of Frida Kahlo before she got sick, and she had in the elegance of her family and how they were educated. But I think the painting that is so fascinating to me is the Diego Rivera, and I'm not sure who his patron was, but it's a female against this wall here, stretched out. It reminded me of Goya, the Duquess de Marja, Alba. Of course, this one isn't nude because he did both with the Duquess of Alba, which are fascinating.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, because it related to Goya. And Goya, the reason I mentioned Goya is because he painted frescoes. He's got a fresco in Nuestra Señora Pilar in Zaragoza, which I got to see. But the most interesting one is the one at the Ermita de Florida in Madrid. Mm-hmm. And so they invited him to come paint. And so they were upset with Goya because, as you know, he was very expressionistic, and he painted his frescoes in an expressionistic form. And they told him, change it, we don't like it. And he said, no, I ain't changing anything. So they chased him away. He left. 2 years, more or less. They invited him back, and he finished it there. And he's buried there at the Ermita de Florida in Madrid. So if you ever have a chance to see that one, that is spectacular. But it reminds me of how Rivera was told, okay, take off Lenin.
Yeah.
Nope. At the Rockefeller ones. Nope. And so Goya.
He kind of snuck Lenin in there. It wasn't in the preliminary drawings.
Talk about that Lenin. Lucienne Blanc was she talked when I was living with them that her and Stephen Pope Dimitroff went up there, said they had forgot something from the scaffolds up there. So they allowed her to go up there, and she had a little Leica. And she took the only photograph of Lenin before it was destroyed. She says, so I was just guessing on perspective. And so.
Well, there are 2 or 3 that she must have gotten, because there are 2 or 3 that are out there that are reproduced quite a bit. Well, in terms of this exhibition, for me, it's really interesting because it's based on a personal collection, the Gilman collection. And So it's a very personal series of paintings and photographs they've collected. And then I think there are photographs added in for the purpose of this exhibition from a different gallery, the Throckmorton Gallery, where a lot of the Frida Kahlo photos are from. It's hard to pick. It's hard to pick a single painting or two or three. There are certain trends that I found interesting. One is the Frida, of course, the Frida paintings themselves, from when she's a younger to an older woman. There is the portrait by a Spanish artist of Natasha Gelman as an old woman with a Frida in the background, and I like that dual painting. The Diego Rivera of the little girl sitting on the chair, the Tamayo paintings of Cantinflas, and the portrait of, I can't remember what the other one is, but I was always interested in Tamayo, aside from the gorgeous colors of Tamayo, that he talked about wanting to ground his work in lo mexicano, which of course all the artists were doing in the 20s and 30s after the revolution. But the point he made was, after looking at artwork out of Europe and artwork in New York, and the idea of a universal art, which meant a European art, he said, I think there can be a universal art where the ground is Mexico. And our traditions can be universal. And I always thought that was really interesting. In terms of the Frida paintings, the small one, it's a very long title of the universe, the earth, Diego, me, and Mr. Xolotl, which was their squinkly dog, which a lot of people saw as surrealist art. And I always found it very interesting that, first of all, Frida was flattered by the attention of the surrealists, particularly André Breton, who talked about her as a ribbon wrapped around a bomb. And she showed in surrealist exhibitions, but she said, you know, I paint my reality. And that's similar to other artists like Leonora Carrington, the British artist, who was part of the surrealist milieu, who moved to Mexico, who painted a mural there actually for the Museum of Anthropology, and who said, I cannot be you can't think of me as a surrealist, because the surrealists always have to have women as muses. And I am not a muse, I am an artist. And there's a complicated relationship among surrealist artists with the whole idea of womanhood. But that painting of Frida, to me, and I've seen it over the years, it's about this big. She has the whole universe there. And you think of the scale of Riveras' frescoes, and he has the whole history of Mexico, and she has the whole universe right there. And it's very personalized. And she has a gash. She has a wound. Her work is just very powerful. But what the works of art in this exhibition say to me is that modernism in Mexico, or modernism, say, in Venezuela or Peru or Argentina or all the various countries of South America. You can't test me on all the countries. I can't pull them out. But that we think of modernism as modernism, whether it be in the literature, visual arts, and what you see there are many modernisms, and they look very different. And that's why learning about the art of Central and South America and the Caribbean along with Chicano art and along with US-based modernism, and we can look at European modernism too, that there are many different ways of addressing the fact of becoming modern. I find the study of Latin American art as very instructive in the various different kinds of thoughts, from abstraction to the indigenismo approach to lo mexicano approach, and that's why why art is so powerful, because it's so different depending upon. And if you looked at modernism in India, it would be very, very different, and different throughout the subcontinent.
It was mentioning, like you did with Tamayo. Tamayo is incredible, going to see his murals at the Museo de Antropología in Mexico City. And to know that Siqueiros tried to do fresco, but his polymer approach and his dynamics perspective, that you can just look at it and learn and keep on learning as to his approach.
Well, it's extraordinary if you look at the Electrician Syndicate mural in the staircase, like the staircase you're working on now, although it's a different structure, with his polyangular perspective and the fact that he actually did geometric measurements of where you would be standing when you'd see a certain part of the mural. He worked too fast. He was too impatient. He was too aggressive to be able to work in the mural, in the fresco. He tried, and caustic. He tried encaustic, and that was a disaster. And for Chicano artists, Siqueiros, they admired all of the muralists, and they admired the fresco technique. And I think there are Chicano artists who studied the fresco technique with Bloch and Dimitroff. I met them briefly at the Mexican Museum when I was working there as the curator, and they came to visit. Siqueiros, because of his kind of political activism and the way his work was so overtly political, and he walked away from art to engage in revolutionary politics. And he tried to assassinate Trotsky. He was a Stalinist, but he had more of an influence on Chicano murals, I think, than Rivera or Orozco, except Orozco's expressionism. You see it in the work of Willy Heron, who's from East LA, from City Terrace, and Chicano artists also talk about Goya, because he was an artist who made the horrific beautiful.
Well, he's got those caprichos that are at El Prado. But you're right, I can see Siqueiros, he's impatient because of the fresco process. And the people that learn, the artists that learn fresco, the process can take away from that spontaneity and the movement into really creating some amazing pieces. It can be done in fresco, but it takes so much of the process of plastering, etc., etc. But we gave a fresco workshop in Spark, and I taught fresco to a lot of the Venice and a few of the California artists there. And there's only been one person that I think she's in Switzerland, and she has followed up on the fresco.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, she's showing at in Paris and doing things. So, well, both of them are fabulous. The polymer, if I could do polymer, and but once you get, I got the passion to, I look for that level of hours and hours and hours and hours. The fortunate to, of course, in learning fresco from the Lucienne Blanc and Stephen Pope Dimitroff, knowing about Rivera. I prefer Orozco and the power of Orozco. But then you have O'Higgins, Jean Charlot, which I saw in Notre Dame and at the Women's University next to Notre Dame. I forget what it's called, but he's got quite a few frescoes there. And you probably know that dialogue between Charlot and Rivera as to who taught who. That was mentioned in Notre Dame, so I don't have that.
Well, I don't remember any longer the specifics about that, but certainly, you know, Rivera went to Europe to study right about the time of the Mexican Revolution, and he was there pretty much for the duration. And he got he was in Spain and he was in Paris, and he spent a lot of time developing his own version of Cubism. And he actually made some important contributions to the development of that approach to painting, and he became close to several of the Cubist artists. And then he went to Spain, and you can see Cubism refracting into these elongated figures. He was looking at El Greco. And then Dr. Atl, the artist back in Mexico, who is a very important artist, landscape artist, he developed his own kinds of colors. They called the Atl colors. He suggested to Rivera, you should start looking at the great fresco cycles in Italy, stay longer. And so he went, and we've had this conversation, he went to the Scrivani Chapel. He spent a lot of time looking at Giotto. And if you look at his murals, how he forms the bodies, how even some of the actual tropes, the meeting of Joachim and Anna outside the gates, you see it over and over and over again in his murals, is the hug of the campesino with the obrero, the urban worker. And so that, and the way Giotto stacked his figures, and people talk about Giotto often as one of the precursors or the beginnings of modernism, along with the man we were just talking about in Spain, Goya. Thank you. But so that because Dr. Atl wanted to create a massive art form that would speak to the new Mexico, not New Mexico where we are, the post-revolutionary Mexico. And you saw it everywhere. For 40 years, artists were creating these stories in frescoes and non-fresco murals. And and there was a while where Rivera was trying to create pigments that he could use that would be the same as the pre-Columbian artists, say at Cacaxtla, which I don't think he knew about, but at Teotihuacan, the fresco cycles, the pre-Columbian fresco cycles, that he was trying to understand to make an indigenous Mexican fresco technique. And he never really could do it. He worked a lot with plants and things like that.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because the Bonaparte murals,
Yes.
because somebody wanted to sell me Mayan blue once. Hey, I got Mayan blue. This is so expensive and it's so hard to get. So I ended up in Mexico City, and we went to Frida Kahlo's and Diego's homes, and also went to a conservator there. He says, you can't buy Mayan blue. We hardly know how to make it.
Yeah.
And the Bonaparte frescoes or murals, they used this so-called Mayan blue. But getting back a little bit to the frescoes, on the artists that kind of influenced me. Of course, Rivera, Orozco. Orozco's frescoes are just so incredible to me.
They are heart-stopping.
Yeah, and then in Spain, Goya, but when you mention the connection between Rivera and Giotto, I could see the forms now. I never made that connection, but I can see where he went into Italy and started to look at all these frescoes, because that's what I did. I mean, Signorelli, Leonardo worked on frescoes, trying to change it also so he can move up the process to paint frescoes faster. You can't. That's the unfortunate thing, or the fortunate thing about frescoes is you can make tortillas one way and you can try a little bit, but in frescoes you have the process.
So I have a question for you, because you studied with Dimitroff and Lucienne, and they learned their technique from Rivera. The fresco artists who were working in Mexico in the 20s and 30s and 40s mass-produced these things. They worked so fast. They did so many. And the Detroit murals were done in 1 year. And the Orozco's murals at Dartmouth, in the library there, were done in a very short period of time. With one arm. And his Guadalajara fresco cycles were done in a period of a year, 2 years. How did they do that?
Well, they had teams. They had plastering teams, the plastering process, because on Dimitroff, Stephen, when he went to Rivera, he says, okay, you can go, because Frida said, pobrecito Diego, because he wanted a job. They sent him to work with, I forget who the plaster boss and they did all the plastering. They also did a lot of his Sinopia drawing and his cartooning. Mainly what he had to do was come and paint. Everything else was taken care of.
He did 18 hours at a time or
and
something.
That was his forte. Paint, they can plaster, they can prepare the cartoon, the pigments, everything else. When you have a president behind you,
it does make a difference.
I'll wait for a president to come and say, hey, let's get a team going.
Yeah.
Because you can only do so much. And they were fortunate to be able to have teams. In that film, and there's a film, you can see somebody drawing Riveras with charcoal, one of his Sinopia drawings, and getting ready for his cartooning. So they were fortunate. They had, and the Italians the same. Michelangelo, he had architects, he had, you can name it. Well, when you have the Pope behind you.
When it's that kind of institutional support, the U.S. has never had, except for that period of the WPA, federal support for massive art projects. We have a different relationship to the arts in this country than most other countries. We see it more as a place for private patronage rather than public patronage. And there are lots of conversations about that and whether we should have public patronage as well. But
Yeah.
that's a long
And
conversation.
when I was in Europe, when I was in Santa Fe de la Vega, Granada, I had a team of plasterers. They would come, they would plaster, they would help. And also in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
The
That went
wall
very
The
quickly.
wall preparation, yeah, that went. There was the help there, and we go with the flow now, and fortunately we have a wall.
I was thinking about Orozco's Hospicio Cabañas, Cabañas, in Guadalajara, and
At the orphanage?
at the orphanage, and it's the ceiling and the cupola and the walls, and they have a whole series of benches, so you can lay down on the benches. They should do that at the Torreon, so you could lay down on a bench and look up at your fresco. Don't you think that's a good
They
idea?
have chairs that take you back.
Oh, they do. Okay.
They just put those in there, and that was nice. But you're right. I was fortunate also to see that Orozco Fresco. Is that and then he's got one in what's the name of that university? Prometheus Seeking Fire.
Oh, that is at Pomona College. Yeah, we saw that about 2 years ago. A woman who was at the art museum here at UNM is the director of the Pomona Art Gallery. And so we went to visit her, and she took us over there.
Well, the Dimitroffs always told a story about the value of art and how we as a society think about how much it's worth. So the Orozco Fresco Pomona is in the cafeteria or the dining room.
It's in the dining hall, yes.
And the students there would throw food at it.
Salt shakers.
I didn't know about the salt shakers.
Yeah,
but
I mean, those are good missiles. Think about it.
so eventually they had to restore it.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is they have a sign that says, this is valued at over $1 million. No salt shakers going anymore, but it puts a sheen on it and it stays. But to show the mentality of how individuals think about art.
Yeah.
I mean, that one is worth $5 million, $2 million.
Yeah. Why do you have to put a
There
dollar
you
value
go.
on it for them not to throw a salt shaker
You would
at
think
it?
that they would understand that, but
Yeah.
that's what's
Yeah.
interesting to me. Well, the process that I've experienced in fresco and the creation of frescoes is a little complicated because, first of all, you have to find a wall. And then if you find a wall, hopefully you have somebody that's going to patronize it. And fortunately, what's happening now, the city of Albuquerque and the 1% for the arts is fabulous. My boss, Sherry Bergerman, the vision that she had, the arts board through the city, that's why Albuquerque with all these murals and things that are going on. So to create one then, besides having somewhat a patronage or a city or an organization that can fund and pay, is the development of the thematics. What do you want to say in public art? Because that's what it is, public art. As you know, the Italians, it was religious public art, and this is the way you knew your religion. And in Mexico, it was political, social, what do we want to say? It hasn't changed in the religious sense, but in the social sense, we're still creating the same kind of what is there to educate and to say. So I'm not sure. I remember I was in Spain and I asked the mayor, what do you think, alcalde? ¿Qué te parece? And he told me something that I almost went back. He said, who am I to tell an artist what to do? And I get
Nice.
the freedom.
Yeah.
Well, once you have freedom, sometimes that's a little scary because you have
Sure.
you have a lot of responsibility. And so finding a wall to create public art, because it's going to go to the public, is not an it's a little complicated, and it has a process that we all have to go through.
Well, it's interesting at the time of the Chicano movement when all the Chicano murals went up, and it was true for community, it was the community murals per se. The first community mural was the Wall of Respect, which is an African-American mural in Chicago, or was. It no longer exists. The building was torn down. But very shortly thereafter, it was on a storefront, two murals facing the doorway, and the left side was inspired by Bonampak. It was a series of people sort of marching towards the doorway, pre-Columbian elites. And on the right side, it was members of people recognizable from the Mexican Revolution, from the Black Civil Rights Movement, Cesar Chavez, because this was the Teatro Campesino Cultural Center and the Teatro Campesino was started in support of the United Farm Workers Movement. So here, the very first Chicano mural was on this storefront, and it included the pre-Columbian, it included the Mexican Revolution, it included Black Civil Rights, i.e. the Panthers, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X, and Cesar Chavez. And Gregorio Cortez, a 19th century figure. And then people took over walls and housing projects. And the way they got the themes, it was everything from a memorial to a fallen gang member, to Orale Raza, to the United Farm Workers, to We Are Not a Minority with an image of Che Guevara, to Dreams of Flight by David Boteo, which is about different kinds of flight, including paper airplanes and eagle nights. And then the Great Wall of Los Angeles, which Judy did in the flood control channel in San Fernando Valley, where she worked with what they euphemistically call youth at risk. And it was the history of Los Angeles that was never in the textbooks. So all the histories of all the different people of culture, of color, the LGBTQ community, although it didn't have all those initials back when they were painting the imagery. So it was a combination of taking walls and finding walls, and but it was all about the wall and the relationship to the architecture. And in that case, that was community art made with the community for the community, and and everybody who hears me speak is sick of this phrase. It was community-based art making, but it was also art-based community making, because the art itself was helping to build the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Great Wall that Judy Bucket painted is unbelievable.
It's a half mile long.
Yeah, and to express and to be and the city to say, okay, well, it was okay. It wasn't gonna. They didn't think that, hey, you can have all the walls you want in the irrigation or the channels. And I think that's a fabulous thing when society allows so-called people at risk or people that need to say, artists that need to say something. Here's a wall. And what you're going to educate and we're going to express is fabulous. And that, I think, continues or is even getting more movement or more appreciation as to the area. I don't know. What do you think? Are we gonna be there? The walls are gonna be available?
Well, They have all sorts of plans at Spark for expanding it, painting on the other side. They've restored it recently, building a walkover that you can stand up in the middle of the. So there's a park right there. But Judy, as you know, is a force. But when Judy isn't there anymore, who knows what will happen. But in terms of the legacy of the murals and the fresco technique, the murals at Estrada Courts are dying slowly. There are a few that have been restored. The buildings themselves have been restored, so people have a much better place to live than they did, and that's ultimately probably more important than the murals, but it would be nice if they didn't die. They are documented. The Ramona Gardens, the projects themselves may disappear. There are murals that have been restored at Ramona Gardens. The Chicano Park in San Diego is flourishing. It is a designated I don't know what the exact designation is, but it's like a heritage site, so it is protected, and murals are added there. The idea of fresco, the legacy of fresco itself, how will that continue? Will that disappear as an art form? Will it exist only in the walls that are currently there and in the documentation of those walls and those histories? And hopefully the walls stay there.
Right. Well, in my case, in fresco, I always want to teach and share and pass this knowledge on. And so there are already 3 artists that are still in this area that are teaching in schools that are showing fresco and doing fresco with the youth. So hopefully that seed, once planted and watered, continues.
And it doesn't have to be a lot of people, just so some people are out there doing it.
Yeah, there's a few out there, hopefully. And in Chicago, there's that individual that worked on the Detroit frescoes that he did, and I forget what his name is, but he also learned with the Dimitroffs, and he's moving, and I hope he's teaching it. I'm not sure if the universities will ever get back to teaching fresco. Maybe a fresco school that will develop here, which I'm thinking about that, and I think the cultural center eventually they wanted to do a fresco school, but if not, I will be doing one at home.
Excellent. Excellent.
So, yeah.
That's very good news.
Yeah.